Okay. Wanted to talk a little bit, just because I wanted to, about this past week. Several of us from here, six, I guess? Six of us. The four you see there, not the guy in the back. The guy in the back, that's Keith Lancaster, if you don't know him. And that's what you call photobombing. We were doing a selfie, and he saw us doing it, and so he hopped in and planted himself in the middle back there. Keith is the guy that is the hook and bull for all of the a cappella program that we all participate in. But the four there, Mike and Linda and Dee, who are all here in the class this morning, and then Jason and Joy Henry. And so I've been doing it now for a number of years. This year was especially good. It was in Burleson, Texas, which is just south of Fort Worth. Had right at 300 singers on the recording, balanced between the four parts. From as far away as Albania, there were 5 there from Albania. And, of course, all over the United States and Canada.
Mexico.
And was Mexico there? Yeah, that's right. Mexico was there, too. Yeah. And the way we do the recording, there are 25 songs. And the first 2 days, or the first day and a half, I guess, because we start at noon on Tuesday, are the vocal recording, the actual recording of what you will hear on the CD or on the MP3, however you download and listen to it. And that's basically work. You got 300 people trying to sing precisely together, in tune, in tempo, starting together, stopping together, not standing out. You want to hear like 4 voices, alto, soprano, tenor, and bass, but with the fullness of 300 people. And so it takes a lot of concentration. We record all 25 songs twice. We'll sing through it, then we'll go back and they'll punch in the mistakes. We'll redo the mistakes until we get a good, clean recording, and then we do it again. And that gives the lady, Keith's daughter, Melissa, gives her all the material to edit and master the final product. And then the next day, which in this case was Thursday, we go through all the songs again, some of them twice, but this time we're singing to a click track to keep it in sync with what we did the previous day, but it doesn't matter how precise we are, so we're encouraged and invited to worship. And all of a sudden it takes on a whole different complexity. We're not in sections anymore, we're all together, we're surrounded by all the parts, and you got 300 people who know how to sing and love to sing Christian music. And it is about the nearest thing for me to heaven on earth. Now, I know that all different people come to the heart of Jesus in different ways, but for some of us, music, and especially Christian a cappella music, is really where it is. So it was a very excellent week for us. I think the product is going to be very, very good. It just sounded really good. I have a little clip. Joy Henry, our Joy, often is invited at these things to sign to a song. And so Thursday evening, in our time of worship, all of us together, they brought her up, and she signed to the little song that you're going to see here, When the Night is Falling. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. This is just a raw iPhone recording. So you're not going to begin to get the impression of the music that we heard there. And I didn't know she was going to do it until she was already up and started. So I don't have the best position, so you're going to see a little bit of gray hair in the edges of the video where I was sitting behind some people. But I can assure you that Thursday night, while she was doing this, there were a lot of tears in the audience. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. We're so privileged to have someone with Joy's talent here at Southeast. Pretty good for a phone, huh? That's not one of the songs on the album. That's one we've been singing for a long time, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous song, and she does such a beautiful job of interpreting it. All right, to our text. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralytic, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, whose faith? He said to the paralytic, "Son," using a term of endearment, "your sins are forgiven." Now, some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately, Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat, and walk'?" but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, we have never seen anything like this. So he's in his adopted hometown, if you will, of Capernaum, there on the Sea of Galilee. And there's a huge crowd, and you saw pictures of the houses there, the archaeological dig of the houses. They were small and crowded and cramped. Not a lot of room for people to move around outside or inside. And he's got this large crowd, and they bring to him this paralytic. I have the little clip from the Chosen, and if you remember last week when we had the healing of the leper, right at the end of that clip, there was a lady there who was marveling at that, who was of African descent. And in the storyline that the Chosen creates, she is the one who sees that and is so impressed with that and goes and finds her paralytic friend and a group of men to help her. And she's the one that brings him to Jesus. Now, whether that's the way it happened or not, I don't know, but it certainly could have, and it makes for a good continuous storyline. I think I have that next. If I don't, it'll be up soon. Well, as you can tell from the look on his face, things are not going to go as well for Jesus for much of the time after this. He's enjoyed a season of great support, great enthusiasm, and large crowds. But he's kind of set the groundwork now to bring about a change. There's going to be a lot of opposition now that's going to be coming his way. By claiming the right to forgive sins, he places himself at odds, of course, with the Jewish leaders. By refusing to be bound by the oral tradition of the Pharisees, he's going to greatly offend them. And on one of his trips to Jerusalem, he is going to be criticized for healing on the Sabbath. If there was ever a perfect example of the fallacy of legalism, we see it played out in 3D living color in the actions and the comments and the attitude of the religious leaders, the scribes, the Pharisees, the rabbis in Jesus' time. He's going to give not 2 miracles, but 2 parables. I meant to change that, I'm sorry. He's going to give 2 parables about cloth and wineskins, showing that their system of legalistic observances simply will not substitute for the true righteousness God has always demanded. He will continue to go about teaching and performing miracles, but there's going to be less and less fanfare because the people are going to start being afraid of what the scribes and the Pharisees are going to do to them if they continue to applaud his ministry. He's going to select 12 of his disciples, especially chosen to aid him in his ministry. So that's where we're headed now with this rise of opposition. So this is going to be the calling of Matthew. I don't know if you've picked up yet on exactly who Matthew is in the Chosen. He was sitting up on the roof watching and making notes in the little clip that you just saw. And he was making notes when Peter and his brother and James and John were called. So as Jesus was going down the road, he saw Matthew sitting at his tax collection booth. "Come be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. And that night, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to be his dinner guests, along with his fellow tax collectors and many other notorious sinners. That's it. That's the story of the calling of Jesus, of Matthew. There's got to be more to it than that, right? It can't be quite that simple. We know now, because we know the customs of the day, because we know the culture in which this is happening, that Matthew is a very special case. Matthew, of course, is or Levi, as he's called, is a tax collector. He's a Jewish young man who basically is considered a traitor to his people, because he is collecting taxes from his people to give to the Roman government. And the tax collectors have a reputation for not only collecting enough tax to pay the Roman government, but collecting more for their own enrichment. And we know that the tax collectors in that age were very wealthy people. And I'm sure Matthew was one of those. And in the storyline, he's outcast by his family. They won't have anything to do with him because they consider him a traitor to the family and to the Jewish nation. And he's just a very untouchable person to the Jews. And Jesus walks by and he sees him sitting at his tax booth collecting taxes. And he says, "Come follow me." And he does. Now, we've been seeing him in the storyline of The Chosen, observing Jesus, so that he's already got an idea of what is going on with this guy. So it's not like he has never heard of him before. And I think that makes a lot of sense. There has to be a reason for him to just instantly get up and stop doing what he's doing and turn completely around. And you'll see some of that played out in this. I think the clip is next. If not, it'll be up quickly. My favorite line there is, "Get used to different." Yes, sir, David.
Just a question. Tax collectors, was that a post they had to purchase?
I'm sorry?
The tax collectors, like Matthew, is that a post that they had to buy?
I don't know exactly how they got it. They had to have an in with the Roman government some way. I don't know if it was something they purchased or if they had to know somebody or what. But it wasn't just anybody who could do it. And there wasn't very many people who were willing to do it. But if you were more interested in money than in having a family and getting along with the community, well, it was certainly a good job to be in. You saw the Roman soldier there was his guardian. He was the one that kept him safe because he was in danger of physical harm from his own people. And so he had a 24-hour-a-day bodyguard. And that was the kind of condition that tax collectors lived under. They were probably among the wealthiest Jews of the day, and it was all ill-gotten wealth. It was surplus taxation that they didn't have to turn over to Rome, that they kept for themselves. Peter says, I don't get it. I don't get it. Jesus said, "You didn't get it when I called you either." The Pharisees were indignant. "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" This is the dinner feast that Matthew is hosting for them. They asked his disciples. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." So who really were the healthy and who really were the sick? We could talk about that, I guess, at length. "But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." And this is a quotation from Hosea 6:6. "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings." And this is Hosea 4, and Jesus' comment there is what would qualify as a remiz. He gives a part of a quote, and the people hearing it who know the prophets would know the rest of the story. Here's the fuller quote from Hosea 4. What can I do with you, Ephraim? What can I do with you, Judah? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. Therefore I cut you in pieces with my prophets. I killed you with the words of my mouth. My judgments flash like lightning upon you. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. Like Adam, they have broken the covenant. They were unfaithful to me there. Gilead is a city of wicked men, stained with footprints of blood. As marauders lie in ambush for a man, so do bands of priests. They murder on the road to Shechem, committing shameful crimes. So when Jesus said to these religious leaders, I do require obedience rather than sacrifice, this is what they heard, and it was very, very insulting. They considered, they heard a real condemnation of them. And many times Remiz had that effect. We don't get the full impact of it just from what the statement in the gospel is, because unless we go back and see the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. And then some of the disciples of John came. John's disciples said, what's the story with fasting? We fast and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast. And Jesus answered, when you celebrate as at a wedding, when one's dearest friend is getting married, you do not fast. The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. Then my friends and followers will fast. He told them this parable. You would begin by washing and shrinking a patch you would use to mend a garment. Otherwise, the patch would shrink later, pulling away from the garment and make the original tear even worse. You wouldn't pour new wine into old wineskins. If you did, the skins would burst. The wine would run out, and the wineskins would be ruined. No, you would pour new wine into new wineskins, and both the wine and the wineskins would be preserved. The message here in both of these parables, the cloth, I can still remember when women, mothers, wives, patched clothes. Is there any of you in here lived long enough to have patched a clothing? I had jeans that had multiple patches on them. And I guess that if you put incompatible material in for the patch, material that hadn't already shrunk as much as it's going to shrink, then it would indeed pull away from the stitching. And of course, with the wineskins, I think that that's a pretty well established and known concept. And they were continually keeping wine, of course, at that time in the skin of animals. And obviously, a skin, an animal skin that's been in use for a while and as aged will become non-pliable, brittle, if you will, rigid, and the wine's going to expand, and it needs to have a material that will allow that expansion. I found some old pictures of some wine skins where they would hold large volumes of wine. So it's a very ancient technique of storing liquids, especially wine. And that's not exactly what I imagined a wine skin looking like for holding wine, but that apparently is what it was reported to have been for. So Jesus is telling John's disciples that he is in the process of introducing a new yoke. And we've talked about yoke before, where a yoke is the teaching, the doctrine of the rabbi. And different rabbis had different yokes. And Jesus' yoke, he says, mine is easy and is light. And he says that a new covenant, a new way of being in relationship with God, with Yahweh, a new way of thinking is being introduced. And we can't tie that to this old law of Moses, or it'll pull away. It won't. There's no elasticity in the law of Moses. There's no ability for it to expand with this new yoke that I'm bringing to you. This will not fit into the oral traditions and the physical laws of the Pharisees and scribes. And this is what John meant when he talked about Jesus increasing. And this is John the Baptist meant when he talked about Jesus increasing as John decreased, and referred to himself as the friend of the bridegroom. So he's really already laid the groundwork for this with his disciples, but his disciples obviously have not yet got the point. So they're coming and complaining to Jesus that his disciples are not observing the rituals that John the Baptist's disciples have done. And Jesus is using that as a teaching moment to say, get used to different. The times they are changing. And of course, some people were not able to get used to different, and they killed him over it. Fortunately, we would never do that. New demands anew, new wineskins for new wine. Anyway, those who have never tasted the new wine won't know what they're missing. They'll always say, the old wine is good enough for me. And this is a parallel passage from Luke on that same event. I hope we're going to have time for this. Maybe we will. When these events were completed, Jesus led his followers to Jerusalem where they could celebrate a Jewish feast together. In Jerusalem, they came upon a pool by the sheep gate, surrounded by 5 covered porches. In Hebrew, this place is called Bethesda. If you go to Israel, one of the places you will visit will be the pool of Bethesda. Crowds of people lined the area, lying around the porches. All of these people were disabled in some way. Some were blind, lame, paralyzed, or plagued by disease. And they were waiting for the waters to move. This is really a strange story. They're here right at the very north edge of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And they're waiting beside a pool, for an angel to come down and trouble the waters. And the first one who gets into the water is supposedly going to be healed. From time to time, an angel would come to stir the water in the pool. Whoever reached the water first and got in after it was agitated would be healed of his or her disease. In the crowd, Jesus noticed one particular man who had been living with this disability for 38 years. He knew this man had been waiting here a long time. Jesus said to the disabled man, "Are you here in this place hoping to be healed?" The disabled man said, "Kind sir, I wait, like all of these people, for the waters to stir, but I cannot walk. If I am to be healed in the water, someone must carry me into the pool. Without a helping hand, someone else beats me to the water's edge each time it is stirred." This is a large-scale model that's at the pardon me, at the Jerusalem Museum. Full week of singing. You can see the Temple Mount there on the left side. That's the Roman pavilion there on the edge of the Temple Mount. And then right there, not very far away, is the I'm sorry, the pool of Bethesda. This is a close-up of the archaeologist's concept of what it would have looked like in Jesus' day. And this is what it looks like today. There's been a lot of excavation there. It's a very large area, actually. And this is Elaine Shackman down in the bottom of the pool of Bethsaida. Fortunately, it's empty at the time. And there's an inscription there, and of course this sign that you see here is modern. It's not archaeologically discovered, but there has been been a notice, pardon me, found there, implying that there was a temple to Asclepius, an Asclepian temple. Asclepius was the Roman or Greek god of healing. I can't remember for sure if that's his Roman or his Greek name. The gods have the same god as a Greek and a Roman name. I think Asclepian is the Greek name, if I'm not mistaken. He was son of Zeus, Greek god of healing, father of Hygeia. We get our word hygiene from her. Father of panacea. We have an English word, panacea, from that. And he holds the symbol of the snake entwined around the staff. I had always kind of thought, incorrectly, that our medical people today have the rod with the snake symbol. You'll see it on their cars sometime. I had kind of thought that came from the bronze serpent from the time in the wilderness, but that's not right. It actually is from this Greek mythological god Asclepius. That's where that symbol comes from. These are called votive offerings, and I took this picture in Corinth, actually, but it applied wherever Asclepius was worshipped. And what you would do is, if you had a pain or an ailment or abnormality of some kind, and you wanted Asclepius to heal you, you would make a plaster cast of that, form of that, and then you would bring that to the temple, so that Asclepius would know what he needed to heal. So you can see there's arms and legs and a lot of different things here. There's some ears and there's some genital symbols. So these are called votive offerings to Asclepius. The reason I mention that, the whole event there at the pool of Bethesda is, to me at least, is rather strange. Was this just some superstition that they had, that an angel would periodically come and trouble the waters, and then whoever first got in would be healed? It doesn't seem very scientific or very logical. And maybe some of you have some ideas about that, and we can discuss that next week if you do have. The idea that Asclepius was worshipped there kind of gives me the thought that maybe some of that may have been connected with Asclepian worship. I don't know. I could be wrong. I think it's interesting that Jesus didn't challenge it. At least not. We don't have a record of him challenging it. He just, I'm not saying he accepted it. I'm just saying he didn't challenge it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Anyway, Lord willing, next week we will continue to unpack this rather interesting event, and I'll have a little clip for you showing you the Chosen's interpretation of this, which is, I think, very, very good, and it's one of the, as you know the story, the guy's been there for 38 years, total cripple. Can't even get 5 feet to get into the water. Jesus comes, completely heals him. He stands up, it's on the Sabbath, picks up his mat, and before he takes 3 steps, the scribes, the Pharisees, and the rabbis descend on him and say, "Don't you know you can't carry your bed on the Sabbath?" That is the most ironic, thing I have ever thought could happen. Would we ever be that silly? We'll unpack that next week. Time's up. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, God bless week.